Hello everyone and welcome to our Group B live stream. If you are new to live stream and you haven't done this with me before, if you look to the right of the video, you will see a chat box. You can type hello in there and communicate with me through the chat box there. And if you're watching this on a mobile device like your phone or like an iPad, you might consider downloading the YouTube app, because it will allow you to use the chat box. If you're just watching it in a web browser on your phone, I don't think it shows you a chat box or gives you that option. So I just wanted to let everyone know that. Also, if you're watching this live, or even if you're coming back and watching this after, if the resolution on the video looks really pixelated, you will want to go to the take your mouse and hover over the video, and you can adjust, if you select the cog wheel symbol, you can adjust the viewing speed and resolution. And so you might want to make sure that it is set to 780, I believe, or at least 1080p or HD. Depends on your internet connection. So I just wanted to put that out there because I know a few people were having issues with pixelated video in our live stream this morning. Hi Stella, welcome. So if you guys have questions, just type them in the chat box, and as I'm going over your drawing, I'll probably ask you questions if you're here, or you can ask me follow-up questions. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. I hope everyone was able to find the new link. I had posted it this morning on the forum. YouTube had changed a couple of their settings, so I had to send out a new link this morning to access the live stream. So I hope everyone found that okay. Hi Brenda, welcome. So how did the lessons go for the first week for everyone? You guys have a good experience? Do you have any questions you'd like me to talk about in the very beginning before we start the critiques? Now, if it's a question relating just to your drawing, we can address that as I go through your piece, but I'm talking about just questions in general. And you will notice that sometimes there is a little bit of a delay between when I'm talking. You might hear a pause. And that is because I'm trying to stream in high resolution, and so it creates a little bit of a lag between your response in the text box and maybe when you hear me respond to you. So just know that there might be a 4-second, 5-second lag of me being quiet waiting for a response, and that's just so that you can get the best resolution when I'm giving your critique. So I'm going to go ahead and jump in. Hopefully more people will join us. I know there's people all over the world in different time zones, so if you cannot attend a live session, that's okay, because I will post the link to the live session, and it will also be available just in my YouTube channel after it ends. And it usually takes YouTube about an hour, depending on how long the live stream is, sometimes a little longer, for them to process the video and set it up. For you guys to view, because they have to kind of convert it into the different resolutions. So it might take a little bit of time for it to show up for you after it ends, but it will be there, and I will post links to it in the forum if you aren't able to attend live. Hi Penny. Hi Joyce. I'm glad you guys can make it. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and get started on the critiques here. And if some question pops up, just kind of write it down, and at the end we'll do another brief Q&A, and you guys can pop in and just ask any questions. If it relates to your critique as I'm giving your feedback, then of course you can type it in, and I keep an eye on the chat box as we're moving along. So I'm going to do Todd's first here. And one of the ways I like to do these critiques is with a direct overlay of the photo reference. Now, this isn't about copying the photo per se, but it's more about, of course, achieving a likeness. I think that's something with portraiture that we're all interested in, is achieving the likeness and kind of the spirit of the model. So this is one of the ways I like to help you check your drawing. And so I'm going to go ahead and get started. So the white lines in the drawing here are the areas that I feel need some correction. And so any areas that don't have a white line is pretty obvious. Those areas are just fine. So Todd, one of the things I noticed, you have a beautiful drawing, and I'd say it's nearly there. It does look like her. It looks like an almost slightly younger version of her, and there's a few reasons that it looks a little bit younger, and that's partly because of this jawline here. So one of the things that I noticed, let me get my pencil to drawing in black. So the width here in her jaw, your line is right here. And we need to give her a little more fullness in the face in terms of width here. And that's going to age her just a little bit. Also giving her that longer jawline down in here is going to elongate the head just a little bit to where she won't look so young. Part of the reason this area feels so short is because we are seeing the underside, this underplane. We're viewing the model from a slightly lower vantage point, and so it can give the illusion of them looking younger because it makes the lower half of the face shorter, and that can make them look childlike. Another thing that can make an adult portrait look childlike is, enlarging eyes, or having too big of the top of the head, because children have a very tall and large cranium up here, and down here is very small. The lower part of their face is smaller. So, and the eyes are obviously the same size, so as they are when they're an adult. But on a child's head, which is smaller, obviously it makes the eyes look quite large. So those are a few things to look out for as you're drawing portraits. Is trying to capture the age appropriate age of your subject. And young adults can often be, especially teenagers, are some of the hardest to draw because they're in between, and it's so easy to push them either towards looking older or towards looking a little bit younger. So the first suggestion, of course, is to bring that jawline out, and then as a result, you're going to end up bringing this shadow shape out a little bit wider. Now, if I pull up the photo reference, I think what you might have been drawing in here was the midtone. And I want to make a good distinction about midtone versus shadow, because it's sometimes a little hard for us to read because there can be a really dark midtone. But you want to make sure that the shadows that you're drawing, when you're outlining your shadow shapes, you're looking for anything in this value range. That constitutes a shadow in this photograph and in this lighting situation. So anything that's slightly lighter or slightly more opaque than that is considered a light mass. And you can see there's like this warmth, transparency kind of feeling to these darks, and here we have this kind of violet kind of opacity. And so that's another way to kind of think of it if you're having a difficult time determining whether something's a shadow or a light. Another good area where that might be a little hard to determine is in this transition here. But this part is considered part of the shadow shape. And what I look for is that darkest core line before it starts to take on a lighter and more opaque hue. Okay, so that's something just to clarify, because I know some people have had a little bit of difficulty identifying where those shadow shapes were. Okay, so going back to the photo here, or the drawing here, looking at the features outside of the cheek, which is pretty important, actually over here too, I think you have your temple here. Just widen that a little bit over to the right. That's going to give you a little more space to open up this eyebrow and the eye shape. It was feeling a little condensed because I think you have your eyebrow ending here. And So looking in the eye here, you can see, now this eye was in spot on. It was exactly where it needed to be. This eye needs to come down just a little bit. And let me show you. So you can see it's almost where you have this line is where that upper shelf or the eyelash line should be, and then below that should be another line here for that under shelf of the eyelid. So it's not by very much, but it will make a difference in your drawing. So I would focus on that, and then as a result you're going to end up bringing the pupil and the iris down a little bit and also opening up the eye a little bit more towards the bottom. It's a pretty minor change, but what it's going to do is establish the correct tilt between the eyes. Another thing is where is that shadow shape edge and where is that contour? This opens up a little bit more quickly right around the top of the lid, where the opening of the eyelid is. So just pay attention to where that starts to arc over to the eyebrow. And then here in the nose, it's a height issue, so we want to bring this up. So you have the bottom of your nostril here and the opening of the nostril here. And so those need to come up and a little bit to the right. Make sure you look, it looks like you had a line here to kind of help you establish perhaps the corner of the chin there, but you could use that grid line to help you see where the wing of that nostril sits. So if you just bring that up and also make sure you're not making your cast shadow loop too big. Now this happened with some of the students. Hi Todd. Uh-oh. Okay, so you were accidentally watching a Group A replay. That's probably because if you took the link out, I had posted something in the forum this morning. The YouTube, the way they operate their live stream, they changed my links. And I didn't realize it till this morning, so we had a little bit of troubleshooting this morning. And I sent out a new link for everyone in the forum. So I'm glad you found it. Now you should be able to, just so you know, Todd, I'm working on your drawing right now. And so you should be able to scrub back and watch the replay. You can either wait till the end, or you can, I think it'll let you scrub back now. I'm not entirely sure. So you can choose which one. But I've just been talking a little bit about the eyes and position. All the white lines are my suggested edits. Okay. And actually at the end of the live stream, I'm going to be emailing everyone this picture with the white lines so that you guys have a template to kind of work off of. So everyone will receive an email with their picture that looks just like this with the white lines so that you have something to look at as you're working. All right, so let's continue, Todd. I'm glad you were able to find the link and get here. All right, so one of the things that I noticed a lot of students had an issue with was this loop cast shadow. It's easy to make it too big. I do it all the time. So one of the things that you can do is you could use like a comparative measurement to measure like the distance of that shadow, compare it to the eye socket or something similar. Or you could just compare like a distance like from the chin to there to where the bottom is. But the key is if you make it too long, what tends to happen is we push the mouth down because it's easy for us to see the relative distance between the lips. So let me get rid of my white lines real quick. So you have a good distance, a normal distance here, but because your loop is just slightly too long, it pushed the mouth down and you didn't give her as full of an upper lip as she has. So it's a very minor change, but it will help lock in her likeness. So I would just shorten it up to about where that white line is, and then you can see where the lip ends up being a little more full. I think your lip is something like that. You can see it underneath. And so you're going to just bring that out a little bit and round out the top of her lip and the lips are very, very soft. So, you know, when I outline the lips, sometimes I just give myself a few indicators of like the position for the transfer instead of a full outline, because the lips are very soft and there's always going to be lost and found edges, that when you get into the painting portion, you might find that having a full hard outline around the lips kind of fights you when you're trying to move into the more tonal stage. So just something to keep in mind. Landmarks are important, you know, obviously getting the position of the corners of the mouth and the height is important. Now, typically with the upper lip, I will outline because in this kind of lighting situation, it's mostly in shadow. But with the bottom lip, what you did here is perfect. You just kind of gave yourself a shadow shape for the bottom lip. It gives you a sense of where this comes out into the light and that this is an undershelf. And then, you know, you have the form of the chin. So that's great. The only other thing is your corners of the mouth seem to be pretty good. This one, I think it's pretty good. I think you had yours maybe come up a little fuller right there. So just kind of have it taper off to a nice point here. But instead of having this dip down so severe, just straighten it out across from this height and then taper it down. It's subtle, but it's going to give her that kind of lower pout that she has. You did miss this earlier, Todd, but I'll just repeat it. The biggest part that's making her look kind of younger than she is the fullness to her jawline in here. So you can see your line is right in this area. So you want to pull that out, and also a little wider across the temple here. So that's just a review so that you can catch up. And then I only indicated that this maybe could open up a little bit. She has this cast shadow, but then there's the hair. You could leave it blank and just kind of mass it in and kind of just make the distinction later when you're in paint of where the hair versus the cast shadow is on the face. Or you could put it in linear. Also, the part of her hair is a little bit more to the left. And if you wanted to, if you lighten the photo enough, you can actually see her ear and earring in here. That's up to you if you want to include it. I just kind of outlined it. Looking down into the body, it feels like you have her rotated a little more where her chest is facing us, maybe a little more head on. So to get her to turn a little more 3/4, you want to raise the shoulder. Now where you have this peak of the shoulder here, the ball, it's in actually the good spot. So it's just the line leading up to the neck could be raised a little bit. Maybe don't have so much of a scoop here. That's because the muscle of the trapezius is actually a kind of a rounded form. And then we have the clavicles. So just it's important even when you're drawing clothing to think about the form that sits underneath. And then just maybe a little wider. You don't have to go as wide if you feel like it's going to create a tangent with your canvas. But maybe just a little bit wider there, and then shorten this up. And what that's going to do is rotate her body a little bit more. And that's pretty much it. So do you have any questions, Todd? So as I mentioned earlier, there might be a little bit of a lag between me asking you a question and you responding, and that's just because we're streaming really high resolution, and so that you guys can actually see what I'm doing. So just keep that in mind if you hear a long pause. All right, I'm going to move on, Todd, but if you have any follow-up questions... Oh, there you are. See, that's that lag. Okay. Your question is, later, would you be better off with gesso board or the Claessens panel linen? You know, that's up to you, but personally, gesso board is a little better. Now, it depends. If your linen is stretched, you're going to have a little bit harder time transferring just because of the pressure that you have to apply to transfer. If your linen is mounted to a board, the only thing you have to watch out for is pressing too hard, because it might leave a groove in the linen. So just when you transfer, press, do a couple of tests and see how light you can press with the transfer still working, and still transferring dark enough for you to see. I find that just because, it's just a personal preference. I like working on gesso board because of it shows the texture of paint a little bit easier, but it still has enough tooth to where direct painting isn't so slippery, and that's what I'm using in my demonstration, is the gesso board by Ampersand. But it's a personal preference. If you like linen, that's fine. Just be careful when you're transferring, so that you don't press too hard, because I've had that happen where I've transferred and it leaves this outline groove everywhere, and it just shows through no matter how thick you paint. So that's just something to keep in mind. If you're working on stretch canvas, the risk is the pressure as you transfer kind of weighs down, and then you'll have this floppy canvas because you've kind of pressed on it repeatedly and it stretches it out. Now you can get around that if you're working on stretched panel or stretched canvas, by placing a piece of wood behind the canvas, or like you put some cardboard back there and just kind of hold it up against the canvas while you transfer. That way it doesn't create like too much pressure and becomes loose. So, all right, good question though, because you guys are going to be transferring your drawings. And another note to keep in mind, I did post the videos today, and I'll be updating them tonight, because for some reason when we exported the videos it didn't show the thumbnail of the photo reference, so I'll have the new ones up tonight. But you guys can go ahead and watch the demonstration on how to transfer, but you want to make these corrections before you transfer, obviously. And if you guys have, you make your corrections and you want me to take a second look at it, just post it in the forum. And if you want the green light to go ahead, or if you have a specific area you're still struggling with, just post it and I'll get back to you so that you can move forward with the transfer. Okay? All right. Yeah, beautiful drawing, Todd. I look forward to seeing your drawing develop. All right. Lynn, are you with us, Lynn? I'm not sure if you were able to make it live. Just say hello in the chat box if you can. I'm going to repeat myself a little bit, because some of you weren't here when we just got started. If you're watching this live stream on your phone or a mobile device, you want to make sure you download the YouTube app, because it will let you use the chat box. If you don't have the app and you're just watching it in a web browser on your iPad or phone, I don't think the chat box shows up. So just keep that in mind. If you're not seeing the chat box, it could be because of that. And so you'd want to download the YouTube app for the link. Okay? All right, so Lynn, I'm going to go ahead and get started on yours. So first I'm going to bring up the picture here and a few of the lines. So one thing I also noticed with some of the other students' work, and I even had this problem in my drawing when I came back to it the day after the demo, I made some minor adjustments to my drawing, and one of the adjustments I made was the hair. The width of the hair at the top. It's a little bit more narrow than we tend to perceive it, and part of the reason for that is because we have this backward tilt of the head, and so we have this kind of narrowing towards the crown, just due to that foreshortening and perspective. So I would suggest, Lynn, that you narrow the hair just a little bit, pretty much all along that edge, and actually widen it just a little bit on the right side. When it comes to the face, let me pull up, take that away there. Yeah, so one thing that I think confused me a little bit was this line here. I couldn't tell if that was supposed to be the jawline or if that was supposed to be the shadow shape. And when I did the overlay, it looks like it's exactly where the shadow shape needs to be, and that you actually need to bring your jawline down in here. And it's all in the shadow, so it could be that it was hard for you to see. And so if that's the case, then you might consider taking the photograph and lightening it on the computer so that you can just see within the shadow. And then you'll be able to see that her jawline actually comes down in here. I think I lightened this photo just enough to where you could actually see that. Yeah, so you can see that her jawline drops down a bit. So I would just go in and make sure you outline this and make sure you bring this out a little bit wider, all where you see that white line there. And then your shadow shape, you don't need to have this secondary shape here. That's for the midtone, and we don't need to have lines in the midtone areas. Even though you might find it helpful for you to see when you're first sketching, having lines in the midtone area is going to kind of fight you when we move into the painting and the transfer. So the only thing you really need to be concerned about transferring to your canvas is the essential features and the shadow and light shapes. Okay, and we're talking about the big, broad, kind of abstract idea of the shadow and light. We're not worried about the little transitions and all the complex shapes that are going on. I don't even outline my little highlights, like the highlight on the nose, because if I try and go and paint over that dark line later, that dark line will eventually strike through in the painting as the painting cures. And so it's just going to fight you and you'll have to relayer over that. So to avoid that, just outline where just inside your shadow lines. And just be like this side drops down, you're going to want to indicate that line dropping down. And this shadow, this space feels a little small, which is making her look younger. So I would bring that down to about here, almost level with the chin. It just kind of slowly tapers up. So if you open up that bottom half of the face, I would do that first before you go in and work on the features, because it's totally going to change the portrait and it's going to start looking a lot more like the model. The next thing I would do is concentrate on getting this eye in the correct position before you worry about any of the other features. So with regards to the eyes, the left eye is in the correct position as far as the eyelids go, but the iris is a little large, which is also aging her just a little bit. So the irises, it's easy to make them really big, but that's going to make them look more childlike. And if you even did a comparative measurement of that space to the edge of the corner of the eye, you would find that this iris is a bit more narrow. You have yours a bit more like that. Okay, so I would move that over. And also you might consider dropping this line down a little bit. With regards to this eye, you have your eyelid crease up here, and it needs to move down, and pretty much all of the eye needs to move down by about that much. It seems like you have the tear duct in the right spot. So this point is correct, right? It's just the way you have this kind of arced. It might need to come down a little bit more, and then of course that's going to move your iris down a little bit. But what that's going to do is reinforce the correct tilt between the features. So you always want to look at kind of this relationship between the eyes. Okay, so moving down, once you get the eyes in the position that where you're happy with them, then you can start to make adjustments. Now the nose, the bottom of the nose sat in the correct position, but where you placed the nostrils was a little bit low, so and a little bit maybe too centered. So I would just clarify that. But where you have the wings of the nostril out here and here seemed just fine. So I would just be careful about how you treat this shape here. And let me pull up the photo reference. Yeah, so if you look at that as like an abstract shadow shape, and then you have this shadow shape, and there's like a little tiny shadow shape there. That's how I tend to think when I work, is in shapes. Then that's kind of what your shape is going to look like. So it's just a little higher because you have yours starting down here. Okay, and then moving down, again, a lot of people had an issue with the loop coming down too far. Just make sure you're not making it lower than the upper lip. You can see if you draw a horizontal line, it doesn't go below the top of the Cupid's bow on her lips. And also your center line for your lip was a little too far to the left, where you have the two peaks of the Cupid's bow coming in. So you want to move it a little bit more to the left and give her a little more of a rounded arch moving up to her lip. It's going to give her a little more of a fullness. Very few people have this kind of scooped shape. Some people do, but oftentimes there's it's more of a round and then a straight. And she has pretty full upper lip. And one thing that will also help is you need to move up the corners of the mouth on the left side. That's going to give her a little more of a smile as well. And this corner is actually at the perfect height. It's just a little long. I think you brought it over too far. And one trick for checking if the width of your mouth is correct is to take a plumb line. And I did do a post on how to create a plumb line. You just take a thread, like a sewing thread or a piece of string, a thin piece of string, and you tie a weight to the end of one end, and then you hold it vertically up to your drawing while it's up on your easel, and you can draw these vertical lines to help you see alignment between the features. So you could line up, see where the edge of her nose lines up with the eye, you can see where the mouth lines up with the eye, and it just helps you to make sure the features are all relating to one another correctly. Like you could see, it doesn't always line up perfectly with the same spot because perspective changes, but you could just see what's happening in the photo and then compare what's happening in your drawing. So let's see. So we went over the features. And after you drop this jawline down, you will find that you need to drop in the neck a little bit so it doesn't feel so thick through here. And then just taper off her shoulder a little bit. And this shoulder could be a little bit wider, just to help rotate the body to the correct position. And then I think you might have brought this in too far to the left. It should sit somewhere around here. Again, that's a really handy tool to use, is that plumb line. You can drop a plumb line where you see her armpit sitting on the photo reference. Let me do this one in white just so you can see it. Straight line. So you can see that it should be hitting out here and not up here. So that's how plumb lines work. It's really, really handy. You can use plumb lines when you work with a live model too. It's actually one of the ways that you can check alignment with a model, because you can't use a grid if you're working with a live model, is to use plumb lines. Plumb lines, for example, drawing a line from corner of the nose straight up to see how it interacts with the corner of the iris, for example, or how the corner of the mouth relates to the eye. Okay, so everyone can use that as a tool. Again, just a thin piece of string. You could use a ruler too, but by using a string with a weight, you're actually using gravity's kind of natural. It's called a plumb line because plumbers use it. You don't have to go out and buy a plumber's line. You can just make one. Just take a piece of string, tie a weight, a key, a button, anything to the end of the string, and you have your own little plumb line to use. All right, so that is it for yours. If you have any follow-up questions, just message me in the forum. I don't see you in here, so you're probably watching this a little bit later. But nice drawing, just keep working on some of those proportions. All right, Brenda, are you here, Brenda? I think I saw you in here. Good question, Tammy. So how do you use a string with a live model? So what you would do is very similar to how you would use a knitting needle or like a skewer, how you saw me using it during the drawing stage to do comparative measurement. Basically, you would hold the string away from your body. I always like to fully extend my arm away from my body and lock my elbow. And so you're holding it out, and then you kind of let the string drop, and the weight, you have to wait for it to stop swinging around. You can kind of stabilize it, but you basically hold it up and close one eye and look. Let's say you're trying to see where the eye line or where the mouth corner sits. You would line the string up with the corner of the mouth and then look and see if it lines up anywhere with another landmark that you can identify, like the eye is pretty typical. And so you would just basically doing that almost like you're sight sizing. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that technique, but they use the plumb line a lot in sight sizing. And so it's essentially you're doing the same thing, but you're doing it using a string instead of a stick. And you could do that with a stick. It's just they're usually a little bit thicker and it's hard to see. And I recommend a string that's like a bright color, like yellow or red, something that's going to be easy for you to see, but nothing too thick. Like a thicker sewing thread is plenty thick enough to use for something like that. It's a really handy tool. Most people think you're crazy and they won't understand what you're doing, but it really, really helps. Okay, so Brenda, so let's get started on yours. All right. You have a beautiful drawing to start with. There were just a few things that I think will make a big difference, and the most obvious one that you can see here is the nose. It got a little bit long, and so the one thing you're going to want to do is bring that up. So let me remove the picture here for a second. So you have the nose down here, and we need to bring it up to about there. That's going to make a big difference with how the whole portrait relates. And it's really easy to make the nose really, really long because we see this full bridge here. But typically the nose sits at a third point. So you have like chin to here and then to the hairline. So you have 1/3, 2/3, and then a third. So that's something to keep in mind. Now, we do have a little bit of foreshortening in this portrait because her head is, we're at a lower vantage point. So it actually sits a little bit maybe above that perfect thirds. So that could be causing some of the issue. But if you bring up the bottom of the nose and just redraw your nose shape, but just a little bit higher, you're going to lock in that nose no problem. And that's going to also end up moving your loop cast shadow shape a little higher as well. Okay, and so since that's one of the most obvious points, I would start there. The other one is the width here across the face, especially for where the mouth is positioned. She has a little bit more width of the jaw. And typically, the jaw might feel more narrow if we were more head-on with the model. But because the model is foreshortened and her head is tilted back, we get a more rounded and kind of squared off and full edge here. So we need to actually widen up her face at the bottom. And the reason is we've actually got a portrait that's foreshortened, and this is a very gross exaggeration, but basically down here is going to appear bigger to us than up here. And it's not obviously that exaggerated in the portrait, but overall, the top of the head kind of tapers at the crown. You know, everything kind of narrows this way. And you can see it here. We've got this overall shape. So we want to maintain that and make sure that that's playing into the perspective. So start by widening this here. And you might actually, sometimes it helps to work from the outside in. So you could work on this and this first before you address the nose. So this needs to come out about that much wider as well. And then your shadow shape actually was spot on here in this upper portion. Down here, I think it can open up just a little bit. I know it's kind of confusing because there's a lot going on in here as far as midtone, and some of it's hard to tell if it's shadow or light. But I always err on the side of caution in the sense that I stay within that darkest shadow mass that I see is very, very clear, and I ignore all the little stuff that's kind of happening out here, all that tiny modulation. If anything, maybe that's considered a shadow shape, but it's so small that I don't know if it's necessarily worth, outlining. So you really want to stay within that shadow shape there. So once you fix the outer width of the face, and this continues that width up in here, and this line here is that cast shadow that happens. And you have it indicated here. I would just raise it up a little bit and then continue it through the hair. So outside of those, I would go in, maybe widen the hair here, and then start to look mostly at the nose and then this eye here. And I always find it's important to lock in the eye. So if something is off, in the eyes, for example, it's going to throw off all the other features because we base everything off of the structure of the eyes. There's this triangular relationship between the eyes and the nose, and then there's this larger triangular relationship between the eyes and the mouth. So, and there's even this triangular relationship between the nose, and the mouth. So if you get one of the eyes off, it might throw off your other features. So beyond the outside of the portrait, the width of the face, for example, getting the eyes positioned is the most important. So this eye on the right was pretty much in the right position. My main suggestion was having to do with more just clarifying the shape a little more clearly, defining that tear duct a little bit more. I think, and just smoothing out some of the position of this under rim here, just making it a little bit more rounded. Yours felt a little more squared off, perhaps. But otherwise, that one is in a perfect position. This eye, however, does need to go up. It needs to move up quite a bit. When I'm moving an eye, I always look for a point of reference. So you might take this brow and just move that arc up a little bit higher. And if you look at where you have your crease there, you're pretty much locking in the correct position there for the crease in the upper lid. You just need to give that a little more fullness and don't drop it down so quickly. And then where you have this darker line, that should be the inner line for the eye. And then you need to come out here and show that under shelf. So you would go basically above that line that you already have drawn. And you would move, essentially you're moving what you have here above this line. And that's just going to open up her eye a little bit more. And then you're going to end up moving this bottom up and the iris up. So maybe starting as a reference point, you can just make that a little bit more rounded, add your second line above, erase this section here, keep your tear duct pretty much in the same spot. Well, it needs to maybe go a little higher, but not by very much. Yours is maybe pointing. Let me erase this here. Yours is kind of coming to a point right here, and I have it right there. It's not a big difference. But that's going to get the correct tilt between the features that you have established in some of the other parts of the face. Okay, so let's see, let's go in. Finally, so after you correct the eye, go in and correct the nose that we already went over. With the mouth, you're really not that far off. I think just lifting this corner and lowering this corner. Again, it's about getting that tilt relationship consistent between the features. So like when you zoom out, you can see that there's this tilt relationship. Oops. It's a little off center, but that's the general idea, is that these tilts are perpendicular to the overall tilt of the head. Oftentimes, I actually had some other students ask, how do you get the left eye to sit right? Because I have, another student had said she has an easier time getting the right eye, but when it comes to the left eye, it's really hard. And one of the suggestions I gave was that you position the eye that's easiest for you, and then you look at, if you take 3 points on the head, you take center of the forehead, center between the brow, and you take center of the chin. Oops. And you line those up on a slight curve because the head is kind of slightly egg-shaped. Then what that gives you is, if you draw a perpendicular line, a 90-degree angle, that's going to give you the tilt of your features. So that would help you take the height of this and bring it over. Now that's not always perfectly the case because not everybody's face is perfectly symmetrical, but it is a technique that you can use if you're really struggling getting the tilts to match between the features. So when it comes to the mouth, maybe bringing that up, and a lot of people accentuated the dip here in her mouth, and she has it, but it's so subtle and it's almost like a color difference. I would have the parting of the mouth be just a little bit more straight across the top for simplicity. And those are the only suggestions I have. Do you have any questions, Brenda? Yeah, one of the hardest parts, Brenda, about portraits with any kind of perspective or any tilt, if it's not just like a boring head-on perfect view of the head, which is not all that interesting to paint as it is, but if you don't have that perfect situation, then estimating tilts is one of the hardest parts. The grid helps, but also doing some of that head construction, thinking about the overall shape that you see to the head. So for example, if I was looking for some abstraction in this head here, one of them's the main things would be kind of looking at this diamondy kind of shape, and that's what gives me that almost upside down teardrop shape, looking at the face shape alone. The other thing is looking at that tilt. You have to kind of ignore the nose on a tilt just because the nose protrudes off the face. But what we're looking at is the main plane of the face. So if we were looking at a face in profile, you have the nose and the mouth that protrudes off this main kind of egg shape, right? With the bulk of the cranium if it was profile, but we're kind of ignoring that the nose comes off, and we're just looking at this center plane that constructs the front of the face. There we go. Get a bigger brush for erasing. Okay, so so does that make sense? So looking for that abstraction. Yeah, once you work on those corrections, if you want me to take a second look, Brenda, just post your drawing in the forum. And if you want me to take a second look before you go ahead with your transfer, like I said, I will be emailing everybody a picture that looks like this. to reference, so that you could make your drawing corrections and you don't have to go back to this video. Although this video will be posted and you can come back and listen to this again if you want to remind yourself of some of the pointers I gave. All right, beautiful drawing, and I look forward to seeing your painting. Let's go back. All right, Randy. Are you in here, Randy? All right. Not sure if Randy's with us, but I'm going to go ahead and get started. Okay, Randy. So looking just here at the overlay, you have a lot of things in the correct position. So I just had a few suggestions in terms of changing some of the forms and also eliminating a couple of the extra lines. Not just, I know some of these might be grid lines kind of left over, but also there's certain lines like this. And I know what you're marking out is this shape here, right? But the problem with putting it in your drawing is when we go into the toning portion, this next lesson that's already up, you're going to see that if you put a line there, it's going to fight you and it's going to show through the paint. So really the only lines you want to focus on transferring are those shadow shape lines, the very clear marked shadow shapes. So just keep that in mind when you're getting the drawing ready for transfer. Okay, so let's start with a couple of the outside measurements. The first thing that stood out to me was that her forehead was slanted back a little bit too far, and I realize her hair is cutting across her face, but there is a little more fullness and a more gentle slope as this comes back. And that's going to help also with this accentuation of the cheekbone. She does have very full cheekbones, but I think you could bring this in just a tiny bit. It helps to kind of look at how far this comes out compared to this. And if you look at that distance, something like that actually adds up quite a lot as opposed to this. So just keep that in mind. And also down here, her chin drops back before we have that dip. So you want to round this back. It almost rounds around the muzzle shape. And then you have the ball of the chin. So just keep that in mind too. I would push that back. With the height of your chin is good. It just needs to be pushed back. And as a result, the neck has come out a little too far. And one thing that can help with positioning the neck is doing that plumb line. Okay, you can draw a vertical line and see where it falls on her face. And it should fall right around that point on the lip. So we want to make sure that you have that positioned. So and yours was out in here. And part of that is because you had pushed the chin out. So by pulling back the chin and pulling back the neck, it's going to lock it in a little bit more. Okay, so beyond that, once you make adjustments to the neck, you will find that you need to make an adjustment to the height of your cast shadow, so you will want to bring that up a little higher. Your shadow shape is really close. It's spot on down here towards the bottom, but it probably can open up just a little wider here. That way it gives you plenty of room to create that soft transition in her cheek and it doesn't get too pinched off. The more dramatic that this angle change, or the more you push out this shadow shape, the more drastic and angular her face is going to feel. And she has a very round face, so we want that plenty of room to create those transitionary values so that this slowly rolls towards that shadow. Now on a man or even a female who has a more bony or angular face, you might have a more harsh shadow that comes in a little closer. But on our model, she doesn't have that. She has that very soft transition there. So we want to leave that space nice and open for that. So that kind of concludes the outside of the face. This seemed like it was in the right spot, but instead of bringing this line all the way down, just kind of end it here. All of the transitions in the neck can be suggested in the tonal stage. You don't really see all that much. You just see this kind of tapering of value where it's dark in here and reflected light in here. And you'll be able to do that. All you need to do is just indicate that softness there, maybe a little bit of an overlap here and here, and then do the rest in the tonal stage for the underpainting. Moving into the features a little bit. Once you opened up this space here in the forehead, you'll notice that you can actually bring that eyebrow out a little wider, which will help open up this eye socket. The eye is in the correct position, but the only thing I want to see is make sure you indicate on this side where you get this nice foreshortening that you see that undershelf of the eye. You can see it here very clearly. So let me draw it with a color you can see. So we have this line here, and then we have that. And then we don't see it over here. It kind of tapers off. We see it down here, and then we don't see it here. So it's almost like this little ribbon shape that we're seeing. So that's how you want to draw it, because it's going to be where we place some of our colors. Same thing on this side. You really see it, this undershelf here. You don't see it as it turns this way. However, on the bottom lid on this one, you see it almost the whole way around. So you want to make sure you're drawing it like that. It might feel a little odd, but it's a reminder for when you're in the painting stage to paint those planes in. And that's the hardest part about painting the eyes, is there is those plane shifts that are very, very abrupt and very subtle. Okay, so moving into the other eye here. Yeah, so what I'm seeing here is that you have your crease just cutting off a little sooner than it should. Bring it over. You have it at the right height here. But as it comes into this section, you want to bring that up and over to give a little more fullness to the eye here. And then again, drawing that underlid shape. And make sure you're not making the irises too large. It looks like you might actually be okay. If you end up cutting this down a little bit, you might find yourself having to reshape the iris. Yeah, oh, that's what it was. So the pupils are a little too oblong. They should imitate, they should imitate the same ellipse as this shape. So just round them out just a little bit. And that will help a lot too. Okay, I think in the eyebrow you were pretty much good. It's just maybe take off that higher point. With the nose, you want to get rid of these extra lines here. Just put in the important shadow shape. So if we look at the model here, there really isn't actually even a strong shape here. Her nose is very rounded. It's not very angular. So the shape you would want to put in, I'll do it in white so it's a little easier to see. So the shape that you're wanting to put in looks like that. And I would, of course, indicate at least some of the plane changes just for your reference. You could have a small shadow shape there, and then this shadow shape here. Sometimes the hardest part of drawing is determining what those shapes are. And some people were drawing in her eyeshadow shape. You don't need to do that because it's technically not a shadow. I know it might be tempting to want to define that, but it's really just having lines out in the middle where you're going to be putting light tone. That dark line will strike through your oil paint and show up sometimes years down the line because oil paint gets more transparent as it cures over time, especially if you're using a semi-transparent white like a lead white, which is one of the reasons why we do an underpainting, is so that our paintings become more luminous with time as the color layers become a little more transparent. Then our underpainting is going to show through and our painting will hold up and age very well. So that's one of the benefits to doing an underpainting. So when you're doing that underpainting, that's why we don't put any hard lines out in the middle of the light mass. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay, so just that being said, don't worry about drawing any of these lines here. Even these, too harsh, it's going to age her. We want to just have your shadow shapes and the features, the eyes, nose, lips, and obviously the outline of the face drawn in and for your transfer. All right, so that was pretty much it. If you have any questions, follow-up questions for me, just post them in the forum after you watch the video, and I look forward to seeing your drawing. All right, Tammy, you are up. Are you still in here, Tammy? All right, so let's go ahead and get started. You have a beautiful drawing. It's so close to being finished. I really had to look for some specifics. Just looking at it like this, I could see a few issues maybe with the eye on the right and the mouth. So let's see some of the edits I had suggested. Yeah, so it was mostly with the eye and a little bit in the mouth. But everything else, all your shadow shapes, they seem pretty good. Nothing's jumping out to me too much. Maybe a little full through this part of the hair. Mostly just this angle. I would just soften that angle out. And that should do it. Let me do that in white on this layer so it's in the file that I send you. All right, so let's take this image away. With the jawline, let's start with that section there. It was just that you hadn't indicated anything, and I think it would be helpful for you in the next stage to know where this sits, so that way just knowing like that there's a little bit of an overlap and a symmetry to the jawline here. Because when you paint this area will be darker and then you're going to have a reflected light here. So just knowing where that separation is, a little mark. It doesn't need to be a full line. It doesn't need to connect. In fact, it shouldn't. Just a little bit where you see that crease, maybe a little bit where you see the a change in the underplane of her chin, because that's where the bony mass of the chin actually ends. And that should help you when you're working on those shadows. Outside of that, let's take a look at the eyes here. Okay, so your position of the eyes is actually really spot on. It's just that I didn't see this underplane. That's pretty obvious, mostly on this left side of the eye. So I would definitely indicate that. So where you have this top line seems like it's where the eyelashes are. So just make sure you draw in that underplane. And then I think your tear duct can come out a little bit wider. So I think it comes out to about there. And you can define that inner membrane just a little bit. And you might consider just softening that curve so it doesn't pinch as much on the eye. And you definitely want to see that second shelf in here as well. And then with this right eye here, yeah, it's okay. You know, Tammy, it depends on what size you're drawing to. I mentioned this in the live stream this morning that if you're drawing a portrait really small, smaller than this scale, if this is 11 by 14 or so, then it's almost pointless to try and draw in those shelves because it's just too small. But when you're drawing at anywhere around like where the head's maybe 4 to 5 inches or larger, you definitely want to start to indicate those because it's going to add an extra level of realism and three-dimensionality and, you know, accurate anatomy to the eyelids. So I think it's the same thing on this eye. You just need to add that upper shelf. What I'm seeing is that you actually have this as the lower inner shelf, so if you just go in and add an extra line above it, yeah, so that should do it for that eye there. And again, just I think your tear duct maybe could be a smidge wider just to help open up this spacing of the eye. And you might have dropped this down too low. So I think this part maybe needs to come up. Yeah. So I think what's happening is you have this as that outer rim and you just need that inner waterline just a little bit there, that ribbon. So you're going to see a little bit of the ribbon here. And then it kind of tapers off. So on the bottom eye, it's a little different because we're looking up at her here. We see it like this. So we see the full underplane across this eye almost entirely on the upper lid, but on the bottom lid we only see it in this section. And it kind of just tapers up and disappears because of the perspective in this section over here. So just keep that in mind when you're sketching out that eye. And that might mean that you have to reposition the pupil and the iris a little bit on this right eye because you're pushing this lid up just a little bit. With the nose, you know, everything seemed pretty good in terms of width. Again, I would watch dropping this too low because it makes us tend to drop the fullness of the upper lip. And I think the nostrils need to come up a little bit, but where you have the bottom of the nose seems good. It's just we need more of that underplane height. So just check some of those marks there. And with the mouth, I think because this got pushed down, you probably push the mouth down just a little bit. So bring that center line up and bring these corners up. And you can see it's a very small amount. In fact, there on the left side, it's really close to where you have the top of this line here. So it kind of comes up like that. So, and then once you do that, you can kind of raise this about the same amount. And it will, and then I think you leave the bottom lip, let's see, you leave the bottom lip where it was. Because where you had this shadow shape here at the bottom is right in the right spot. So it's actually just going to give her a fuller bottom lip, which she has. Okay, so those are my only suggestions. Do you have any questions? So you had a question. If you can't remember it right now, just type it in when you do remember and I'll go back to it. Unless you're typing it out right now. Oh, there it is. Okay. On the Imprimatura color, what is my thought on using transparent red oxide? You can use transparent red oxide. I really love that color. I was going to put it on the palette, but I used burnt sienna instead. But I actually use transparent red oxide quite often instead of burnt umber. Burnt umber is the only problem with burnt umber is that it's very absorbent and it sinks in, which means it kind of goes kind of frosty when it dries. And so, as an alternative, you can use transparent red oxide, but I find that it's a little too hot of a color. It's too warm when we do the scumbling technique for the white. So, because then you're going to get this very blue cast for your white. So to kind of balance that out, I would recommend transparent red oxide mixed with a little ultramarine blue, just to make it a little bit more of an umbery color. It will be a more transparent feeling tone, and it will take longer to dry. So just keep that in mind if you do use it. It won't dry nearly as quickly as the umber, and that's one of the reasons I recommended the umber for the class, was just for drying speed. But if you prefer it as a color, and it is a little bit better just in general. It's not that umber isn't an archival color, it's just it can make your upper layers sink in as well if you use it too heavily in the underpainting. So I don't use so much of it and I tend to use a little bit of oil with my umber so it doesn't sink in as bad. It does still, but if you want to kind of combat that issue, then you can use the red oxide. It's just if you use it straight, it is a very red color. It's like really, really red. So it could be an issue in that regard. So you can just dilute it with a little bit of blue and that should take care of it. In fact, you can do an Imprimatura in almost any color. I tend to stay more towards the neutral because it makes judging your skin tones much easier on top. So if you start with a really, really red base, it's going to throw off your perception of your skin tones because every color that you mix in that has white in it is going to look cool compared to that hot red underpainting. So I don't like using a really red underpainting. I try to stay a little more neutral. And I find that just that umbery kind of semi-warm brown lends itself to portraits really well for skin tone. All right. Well, good job on your drawing. I look forward to seeing your underpainting. All right, Penny. I think I saw you in here. It is your turn. Let's see. Let me pull up my suggested edits. So actually just looking at this here on its own, you can see that your drawing is really, really close. Nothing major in terms of position of features. There's a slight difference with this eye here on the left. I think I was going to show you. If you just transition here, you see there's just this little bit of lift. It's subtle. So I think it's that left eye that I mostly had the suggestions for. So let's go ahead and look at some of those bigger adjustments first before we get into the eyes. So here on the left side of the face, I think you do need a little bit more width. So we're going to push that jawline out a little bit wider. And that is going to move into your shadow shape here. So that's just that light mask that we're seeing there. And what that's going to do is open up that space between the mouth and the jaw as well. And that's going to make a big difference in the portrait in general too, because I think it feels like her, but like a thinner, more if her face was more maybe oval. So with that, you would probably widen the neck a little bit so that her neck didn't feel too thin, because your spacing where you have it joining the jaw is pretty close, but it just needs to be wider. Yeah, that was pretty much it. Okay, now with the shadow shape here, let's look back out and look at the photo reference. I think what you were including was some of this. And I can see how that would seem like a really dark section, but the only area you want a line is, again, within that core shadow where it's the darkest, because we don't want any lines out where we're going to be placing white. We just want our transfer line to be hidden within that nice dark mass, so that way it doesn't strike through in the painting later. So I would move that out to here, and this is all going to be done tonally in the underpainting. You'll see that when you watch the videos, how I create that transition and rounding of the form. So I would definitely get rid of that. With the nose, the height of the nose seemed pretty good. Where you have this seems pretty good. It was more that the nose didn't feel wide enough. It felt a little too small. So I would just bring that out, and you can use those plumb lines to help you find the correct width and position of the nostrils, those wide wings of the nostrils. Yeah, you're not bringing it down much, you're just bringing it out. So kind of widening it this way and this way, only in the wing of the nostril. You're not moving the bridge of the nose at all. And then the only other thing is this was maybe a little bit straight. Her nose dips back just a little bit, and that's going to give a little more of an open spacing here for the eye. Okay, so moving into the eyes now, I didn't see anything with the lips. The lips are pretty spot on. So the main thing with this eye is that I feel like this is pretty close, your upper lid. It's maybe a little bit thick through the right side of it, but it's mostly that this line for the lashes needs to come down, and you have your eye kind of positioned here to here, so you just need to drop it down a tiny bit, and then reposition the iris. Her iris doesn't quite go all the way into the corner of her eye. There is a little bit more of a spacing there. It's a little bit more like right here, and that's going to get the eyes looking in the same direction. So focus first on moving the height of the lids, and then reposition your iris on this eye. On this eye, it's pretty similar. I think it just needs to come down a very small amount, although your tear ducts seem to be in the right spot. So I think it's just the curvature, and maybe you had your eye slanting up a little bit too much, and your corner needs to be down here, and that's why everything got raised. So leaving your tear ducts in the same spot. And then on this eye, I think the eyebrow shape got a little bit low. It's not by very much. You can see your line is right here. And I wouldn't worry about outlining her eyeshadow shape. I know this area is kind of hard to read because there's so much dark, because she has that dark brown eyeshadow. But the main shadow shapes I would focus on, kind of dark shapes I would abstract, would be maybe something like that. And then of course the crease. And leave all of this kind of empty, because you can do that tonally using the umber and the white when you do the underpainting. Of course you'd have your cast shadow, maybe something like that for the eye. But again, you don't want real hard lines leading out into the light. Even on this eye, I would not even worry about some of the tone that you see in here. If it helps you to kind of know where that sits, you could leave like a little overlap there just to remind yourself. You would, of course, indicate your cast shadow lines from the hair, but some of these tones I wouldn't bother outlining because it's in the light mask still. Like if you took that value, let's just take that value and compare it to the shadow. That's how light that value is. So it might not seem like it, but if we compared that to the shadow mask, you can see that it's an opaque light. It just looks dark because it's surrounded by so much light on this side. Does that make sense? Sometimes determining what constitutes a shadow or a light or where to place your lines for those shadow shapes can be a little tricky, especially on something that has such subtle form, and it's kind of a low light situation here. But yeah, you want to keep that abstraction there and not worry about those subtle tones. Just like I wouldn't outline, you know, a highlight or the highlight on the nose. I'm pretty much going to be doing that tonally in paint. Down in the shoulders, I think the only other suggestion I had was down here. Just make sure that you bring that maybe out just a little bit. But if it comes too close to the edge of your canvas, you could leave it where it is. It's a pretty minor adjustment. It's mostly just if you want to get the correct width. And it could be that the image is distorted a little bit, so it makes this area feel bigger. Just keep an eye out for any tangents in the painting. If this edge gets cut off, you know, right at that corner, that's kind of a tangent, so keep that in mind. So do you have any questions? You have a beautiful drawing, so I think you're pretty much set. Again, just locking in those eyes. It's better to do it now in the drawing stage than have your painting kind of fight you a little bit later. I'm glad you found this helpful. If you have follow-up questions or you're working on your drawing, you want me to take a second look at it, just post it in the forum and I'll give you a feedback. Yeah, good job. All right, Alexandra? I don't know if you're in with us live right now. Just say hello in the chat box if you are. All right, you have a really nice drawing. I was really impressed. Everyone did such good work. I was really having to look for corrections on a lot of your guys' drawings. I had to be picky. All right. It looks like in your drawing the main thing that needed correcting was in the mouth. The position of the mouth is a little bit high. The eyes are really, really close. I think it was just a matter of some of these curvatures on the outer edge. I think this one, you have the line kind of coming more straight. It's subtle, but if you want to close that off and indicate that under shelf of the eye, and then make sure you're positioning the iris in the right spot. It comes over to the right just a little bit, and make sure they're not getting too big. And that was the same for this right eye here. It just needs to come over to the right a little bit. Here, I'll show you. So that's just going to help. And also on this right eye, I noticed that this feels a little bit flattened here. And you want to round that up just a little bit because that's the direction the eye is looking. And so if you kind of just accentuate the opening of the eye there, And the reason it pushes up a little bit more in that area is because if you think about the eyeball in profile, ooh, that is not, it's a bad circle. Kind of hard to draw digitally. But essentially, if you have the eyeball, let me get a thinner line. So you have the sphere of the eye. We're thinking about the eye in profile. The cornea of the eye is this clear lens that kind of comes off of the eye like that. And then you have the pupil. And then we have the iris. That's the colored, it's like a flat disc that sits back here. That's the colored portion of the eye, and you have the pupil. So whatever direction the eye looks, the lid has to wrap around that, right? So we have, oops, we have this wrapping of that inner shelf. But because this part sticks out, it makes the eye kind of lift in that section. So when the eye is looking up in this direction, it's going to push the lid up in that direction. So usually the highest peak is where on the upper lid is usually over the spot where the eye is looking, whatever direction the eye is looking. You have it here. The highest peak is here. You just need it here. And right now this is kind of competing with it. So it feels a little flat. So that's something to just keep in mind when you're working on that eye. So I think all I was doing in here was just indicating that you want to lift that a little bit higher just in that spot and maybe drop this more quickly. Keep your tear duct in the right spot, but just drop that line a little more quickly so that this doesn't feel like it's equally rounded. And then I think this part, this inner shelf, just needs to come in a little bit higher to make this iris a little smaller. I think they got just a tiny bit too big. So apart from those minor adjustments and rounding out the jawline down here, the main one is actually repositioning the lips. And you drew beautiful lips, but they're a little bit high. So what I would do is start by just taking the shape that you've drawn here and start copying it down here just a little bit and get this new opening positioned, and then go through and erase your old lips and finish out redrawing these. Now, your bottom shadow shape for your lip is actually in the right spot. So let me show you. So I didn't move that. The little cast shadow that you have down here, this shape, is actually in the right spot. It's just that you maybe increased this distance a little too much. So you just want to bring that down, that opening to the lip, and then that's going to open up this space a little bit more. Okay, so those are my only suggestions for your drawing. Everything else looks really good, and you'll be ready for transfer. So just get those lips locked in to the right spot, and remember too that when you're drawing the lips, keep in mind that angular relationship, that tilt, as it relates to the other features. So make sure that this and this corner are not level to one another. I think you even have probably a pretty good tilt relationship here. It's just because we're looking up at her, there's more of this arc to her lips. Sometimes when I'm drawing lips, the first thing I'll do is mark out, I just want to illustrate a concept. I'll mark out where I see the corners of the mouth and where I see this corner. And when you're looking up at someone from a lower vantage point, that arc is going to curve like this. If you're looking at someone more level, those points would be more even, like this. And if you're looking down on someone from above, that arc is going to be more like this, right? So you would see more of the bottom lip. Okay, so just keep that in mind when you're drawing a portrait. I always look at these 3 points and how they relate to one another. Even if you connected these, you could see whether this line sits far above it, sits pretty close to it, sits below it, and that's going to give you the correct perspective on the lips. All right, so those were all the suggestions. I hope that little illustration helped. And if you have any follow-up questions, just post in the forum, and I look forward to seeing your painting. All right, Colin. Are you here, Colin? I know some people are in different time zones, and this might be a little bit late for you. So I appreciate you guys tuning in. It's 4 o'clock where I am now, so it's kind of mid-afternoon for me. All right, so Colin, let's see. Let me pull up the reference and some of the edits here. Oh, there you are, Colin. Hi. All right, so let me first actually take away the lines here. All right. So you can see that your drawing is really spot on in a lot of areas. I think when I was editing this yesterday, what I wanted to explain was that for the purpose of the transfer, you're going to want to simplify some of your drawing. You have a nice kind of angular linear quality. The only part that I think can throw you off possibly is having so many of these kind of lines. Now I realize she does have this cast shadow in this photo reference very strongly across her eye there. The only reason you might not want to transfer that line is that when you start painting tonally, that line is going to jump out and it's going to be really hard to kind of paint over and cover. It might strike through the painting. So maybe you indicate it through the darker part of the eye, but just it's more of a mental note for the future. You don't necessarily need to transfer it. Same thing goes for this eye here. I think just clarifying some of the shape. So let's get rid of the picture of her behind. I would clarify this arc here and that inner shelf. Don't worry too much about that cast shadow going across the eye. You'll remember it when you're doing the underpainting. It's okay to put it in because I know a lot of times when you're drawing, you're kind of working out thought processes. You know, you're making notes for yourself for the future. But when we prepare for transfer, we want to be pretty minimalist when we transfer our lines. Even some of these midtones that end up out here in the light mass, when it comes to like the wings of the nostril, I will sometimes just indicate 2 points. So that way I don't have too many lines that have to be covered up with paint that might fight me, especially out in the middle of a light mass. Keep it in your drawing, but just remember when you're transferring that you're going to focus more on shadow and contour edges of the main forms. You don't need to worry about any of the smaller mid-tone lines. Even the line under here, you almost don't need to because you're going to be doing that tonally. You could indicate like a little bit of where you see the cast shadow from her eyelash, for example. So when you see the lines around the eye, it's not about actually moving the position of your eye. It's more just clarifying that shape and making sure you indicate this undershelf where you can't see it. Okay. With the nose, the only thing I think, maybe move your shadow shape a little bit over to the right so that you have room to round that form. She doesn't have a very angular nose. Her nose is very smooth and kind of round. So, and this edge is not going to be a hard line. So if you imagine trying to move into your painting, you know, the painting I'm doing from a different perspective has a shadow that goes down the sideline of her nose because my cast shadow comes off the nose like that. You don't quite have that. You just have this soft round form. So what I would almost suggest is just indicating an overlap here and an overlap here, and leave the rest to the tonal stage of the painting. You don't want to transfer a hard line all the way across, because that line will strike through in the light mass. So keep that in mind as you're kind of refining your drawing and prepping it for the transfer stage. Again, like these lines even, I don't put those in my transfer because they're easy enough to find when you're kind of painting. And let's see. And down in the mouth, I think it just got a little wide here in that shape. So I would just make that just a little bit smaller. Instead of dipping this down so much, just kind of make it a little bit more straight. And then I think you have this dipping down like this, and I would just kind of round that and connect it, because it's kind of this soft, shadowy mass. And you know, if you're going to draw a shadow shape on the lips, this is kind of that shadow shape here. Oops. Kind of like this. And then you could give yourself just some indicators of where the other shape of the lip is if you don't want to outline it all the way. Does that give you kind of an idea? So that's what we're kind of thinking of. I think this line is your shadow shape, but I would just open it up. It's a little bit too, I think this might also be part of the mid-tone that you're seeing. Yeah, it's this mid-tone shape that you're seeing over here, but that's still considered part of the light mass. So all we're concerned with is transferring that shadow, the shadow edge. When it comes to the jawline, there was only one change. I felt like this got almost too low. Most people actually didn't have that problem. They made it too short. Just somewhere in between. I think it'll soften her, and then bring this, make sure you have a sense of that overlap there, a little bit wider. And don't forget to indicate. Now this was kind of hard to see. I actually had to lighten up the photo. I think I lightened it on this one. Hold on. Yeah, so you can see it here. It's kind of hard to tell where her neck is, but she has this line coming in on the throat, but that's just like an overlap, and then there's actually another line back in here. It's just a little hard to see, but it will help give the correct width to her neck. Of course, it's not going to be that clearly defined in the painting. It'll probably be a little bit more like what you see here, where it just kind of fades, but just keep that in mind when you're drawing. And I don't know if you were planning on indicating her earring, but I just indicated that in there and a little bit of her ear. That's totally optional if you want to include that or not. All right, so do you have any questions, Colin? You know, I almost didn't see it either, but when I was drawing, I thought this felt so, it's almost like you could see it here, but this part went in, and I think it was probably that you were sensing that her neck was wider, because if her neck was here, it'd be way too skinny. So you were probably on the right track here. It's just you couldn't see that separation between the jawline and that, I'm forgetting the name of it, the anatomical name of it right now. Wow, my brain is drawing a blank. I will come up with that name soon. But anyhow, yeah, you can't quite see it that clearly. But if you lighten up the photo, you do see a little bit of that there, that separation right in here. All right, so good job. If you have any follow-up questions after you make edits to your drawing, I'll send a picture of this edit to you. So It'll take me about an hour to send everyone's out because I have to export the files, but you will get a copy of this that will help you kind of make your adjustments. So your question regarding the following, the printed image compared to the digital. So do you mean like switching between like digital and the print? You know, you could use the print for just the drawing stage and then utilize from, if you like working from a monitor, for the color stage and for the underpainting, you can switch to the monitor. Sometimes, I mean, I typically work on a monitor. It is okay to zoom in. The colors don't change just when you zoom in, but the colors will be different between a print and your monitor, for sure. So when you start the color stage is when it kind of becomes important. Even for the tonal underpainting, you can use either one, unless your print somehow turned out too dark. Then maybe whatever you're going to do your color stage in, if you're going to use your monitor as your reference or you're going to use your print, stick to the same one. But that's especially important, and I talk about it a little bit in the color section of the course when we start mixing our colors. Now, when I mixed my colors, I was using a printout, so that I could show you guys how I was comparing the colors. But when I'm actually painting, I did switch to a monitor, so I had to adjust some of my colors a little bit. I don't recommend you guys do that because it is really hard to do. Just stick to one. Like once you're done with the drawing stage, either work from a monitor or continue working from a print. If you do work from a print, make sure it's a very high quality print. That way you're not missing out on any important information or that the colors aren't skewed too far in one direction. Part of the reason for that too is when we get into the color stage, this is the only downside to working digitally over long distance with people is I can't see your painting in person. I don't know what your monitor looks like. It's going to probably look a little different than mine in terms of colors. And same thing goes for prints. If you guys are working from a print, the colors might look a little bit different than mine. And so when I'm giving you guys critiques on that, I'll try and keep that in mind, and you can tell me things like, oh, my drawing looks or my painting looks a lot darker in person, or you know, there might be minor changes. And my best suggestion is to make sure you photograph, especially in the color stage, under really good lighting. Very even lighting, I should say. North-facing windows are really great. Indirect lighting, like taking your painting out into the shade, under a shady patio or nowhere where it's going to get any direct sunlight, and taking your picture there just so that the light's very even and kind of natural. It will give me the most accurate sense of color on your painting. Or if you work under balanced light in your studio, then photograph under the same lights that you're painting. That way I can see what you're kind of encountering in your studio. Yeah. So you can switch to the digital for looking for small details, and even when you get into, you might try printing out two versions of the painting, one where it's a little bit lighter and one where it's a little bit darker, so that you can see some of the information in the shadows and that you can see all the information in the lights. Sometimes I'll do that as well. So when you're working on the shadows, you work from the lighter reference. When you're working from the, and I'm not talking about really, really light. I'm just saying just a little bit so you can see a slight difference. Because prints tend to print out a little darker anyway. And they tend to be a little more biased towards either blowing out the lights or completely losing information in the shadows. So when and that's one of the limitations of working from photography, is that if you were working in life, you could see into those shadows because your eyes open up naturally. Your pupils will open up naturally so you can see more information in that shadow. And then when you're looking at the light, you know, your pupils shrink so you can see more information in the light, and we don't have that benefit with photographs. So while it captures some detail, it always tends to lose some in some area. So that's just something that can help you, is to print one that's slightly darker or normal, you know, as the picture came to you, and then one that's lighter. You're very, very welcome. If you have any follow-up questions, just let me know. All right, Stella. Are you in here, Stella? Thought I saw you in here. Thank you everyone for hanging in. I know it is a long critique. Some of them will go on longer, some will be shorter. It depends on kind of our week and how much work there is. All right, there you are, Stella. How you doing? All right, so let me get this all set up here. Let's take a quick look here. So when I was looking at your drawing, one of the main things that I saw was the height of the head. I think it got a little bit tall, even compared to this triangle shape on the grid. You can see that this is more open. So I think that's going to make a big difference in the feeling of the portrait, because her whole portrait felt very elongated, whereas this model has a very like round shape. Her face shape is much wider at the bottom than it is at the top. And part of that's the perspective that we're looking at her, but also part of that is just her face shape. So I would definitely work on bringing this down to about here, and then tapering that into the width. Now you already have the correct hair width down here, so I think it'll be pretty easy for you to make that transition. And then looking down into the face, I felt like this could be just a tiny bit wider. And again, that's going to reinforce that idea that her face is more like a teardrop shape. So it's a little bit wider down here and also a little bit lower, not necessarily wider over here, but bringing this down here. So just dropping this a little bit more. And if you think about it, it makes sense because here's that symmetry. We want that symmetry between these points. Doesn't mean you need to draw them connected. They're not really connected in that way, quite literally, but it will help them feel symmetrical. When it comes to, I think the hair shape was good. I don't know why I have the lines there. I think maybe I forgot to erase those. I think down here your hair shape is pretty good. I wouldn't worry about that. But when you drop this down, you're going to end up pushing that neck out just a little bit wider as well, but leave your shadow shape exactly where it is. And then with your shadow shape on the chin, it starts off in the right spot, but I think you got maybe a little pulled into some of these midtones. I definitely see those shapes, but again, that's if you isolate that value and you compare it to the value in the dark here, you can see that this one is definitely a light mass, even though it kind of tricks us into thinking it's really dark. So you don't want to have these dark lines out here. So just move your shadow shape open a little bit and give yourself plenty of room to roll that cheek in tone later. Same thing here. You don't need to indicate that because that's going to be done not only in color but also in the tonal underpainting stage where we roll that form using the white and the umber. Moving into the features, I think, let me move this here. Yeah, so what I saw was that your eyes felt a little large, which is making her look younger. But I think it's actually that you just need to clarify a little more where that inner rim and where the eyelid sits. Here, let me pull up. Yeah, so when I transition between those, you can see how where like the top of her crease of her lid, which is right here, I'm just going to put a little mark. And then her opening of her eye here, I'm going to just put little dots there so you can see. That's where it sits in relation to yours. So it's subtle, but I think the eye can be brought down a little bit. So the actual crease of the lid that you have up here moves down, and the whole eye kind of shifts down about that much. The only part that might not move too much is where you have this line here. That seemed fine. And even where you have the tear duct indicated seems okay. So maybe it's just that you opened up the eye a little too high. So you might have opened it up more round, because her eyes do feel very round, but actually when you draw out the shape, they're a little more like diamond kind of shaped. So just keep that in mind. And with this right eye, I think it's the same thing. You have your crease here, just bring the crease of that lid a little bit lower, and then this line is going to shift to here. This tear duct, I think, is too high. I think you have it there. Let me move my line so I can see. Yeah, so you have your tear duct up here. You're just going to move it down and a little bit to the right so it's not so closed into that shadow. She actually has this little tiny light shape that kind of creeps in to this area. It's kind of hard to see, but you want to give yourself just a little bit of that space. And then drop this down. And I think what happened was, as a result of making the eye more open, you made the irises really large to kind of fill in that space. And you'll find that as you move the lids down, that your irises and pupils will get smaller and more appropriate to her likeness. And of course, the eyes are kind of the anchor of the portrait, so I would focus on those before you worry about something like the nose. Usually when I'm making corrections like this, I start at the outside. So first off, make the big correction of the hair at the top, and then make the correction of the side of the face as your number 2, and then get the eyes locked in, and then you worry about the nose afterwards. So with the nose, it didn't seem all that off. I think it just got, oops, get rid of those lines. There we go. It just seems maybe a little bit, like maybe this part got dropped a little low. Let me move my lines here. So yeah, move the nostril up a little bit and a little more to the left. Make sure once you get the eyes locked in, it'll be easier for you to judge where the wing of the nostril sits in relationship to the eye. But and then I would just make sure you have a nice, clearly defined shadow shape, and make sure your shadow shape isn't getting too round. Hers is quite kind of oblong, and it doesn't dip below the lip, so it kind of stops before then. And I think yours ended at the right spot. It just got a little bit full. Your lips are actually in the right spot, so you don't need to worry about that. And once you make those corrections, I would just clean up some of the extra lines that are kind of like out here so that you don't get distracted when you're transferring. Just have only the lines left that you want to transfer. Because when you're transferring, it's already hard enough to kind of track what you've gone over. So you want to make sure that it's as simple and simplified as possible. All right, so do you have any questions? It was mostly that left eye that, well, the right eye too is a little bit high, but I think that left eye, once you get that one locked in, it'll be easier to get everything else into place. would what be better? You could. So if you wanted to take some tracing paper, I would do the corrections on this paper just so that you have the original drawing. But then once you're done making these adjustments, I would probably just yeah, you could do that. If it's too much work for you, don't worry about it. But if it would make you feel better to have a very clean, clear drawing, then once you've made your edits on this drawing, this original, then you could transfer it to a clean sheet of tracing paper. No problem, yeah. Yeah, I've done that a couple of times, and it's also nice to just have a duplicate. I had a few issues a couple of times with transfers, and I had tore up my sheet of paper thinking I wouldn't need it again, and then I ended up needing to transfer my drawing again. So keep your transfer drawing after you do the transfer, because if you mess up your painting or there's some issue, you still have the original drawing that you could retransfer and start over. So it's handy to have. So don't do what I did, which was toss all your tracings. All right, so because then I had to draw some from scratch again. All right, so good job. And just if you have any follow-up questions after you make corrections and you want me to take another look, just post it in the forum and I'll leave a comment. All right, Marianne, are you here, Marianne? You are the last one up. All right, so let me bring in our photo. All right. So I don't know if some of you saw my post earlier. I'm just going to repeat it because I said it at the very, very beginning of the stream before everyone had kind of logged in. If you are watching this and it's really, really pixelated while you're live streaming, it could be the quality of the stream. Either it's your internet connection or it's something else. So you should be able to adjust the viewing of the stream. If you look at the bottom of YouTube window, there should be like a little cog shape, and you should be able to click on that and adjust the quality of your stream. It's usually set to auto, so like if your internet connection is kind of weak, it'll automatically put you on like 3 I can't remember what it's called, but like it's like the lowest resolution, like 350 or something. And you want to watch this probably around at least 700 to 1080, so that way you get a clear picture. But if that doesn't fix the pixelation issue, you might try just refreshing the page, and that sometimes will kind of restart it and reset it to where it's a clearer image. I don't know if anyone's having that issue, but a few students earlier this morning did, and so I just wanted to mention that. Okay, Tammy. Yeah, I don't know what. It could be just that the stream is maybe your internet's a little better. It's hard to tell because sometimes YouTube will automatically set your viewing quality really low. It's a little annoying. So if you go back and rewatch the video, it'll also sometimes put it on the lowest setting when you're watching it, so you can manually change that. I just wanted everyone to know that. So if you're having like a little bit of a viewing issue, and sometimes just refreshing the page. Also, Tammy, it did show me that like 40 some odd people had tuned in this morning, so it could be that we had so many people trying to stream it. It shouldn't be an issue because YouTube's made to hold a lot. I'm not sure why it was doing that, but a lot of time it has to do with your connection, because mine is streaming. At least the upload is very, very clear. It should be HD. So. All right, so moving on. Sorry, that was a little side comment. Okay, so a few of the suggestions I have, a lot of it had to do with simplifying this drawing. When you transfer, you don't want to be bothered with all of this because it's going to get covered anyway. It really doesn't play much of a role in the finished drawing. And same goes for all of these lines. I've mentioned this for a couple of other students. You really don't need all of those markations. All you need is the main shadow shape. So try to go along and find that simplistic shape here. Ignore those midtones. Just follow that very, very clear abstraction. If we were to look at this face here, I just want to illustrate this as an example for everyone. When I'm thinking about the shape, I'm looking at this idea. So when we're thinking about looking at a person from a long distance away, let's say you see your friend down the block, you don't see all their little details of where their highlights are. You don't see all of the little definitions in the face. What you see is this basic light and shadow structure, and you see the bone structure of their face. That's what makes them recognizable. Their hair shape, their mask shape. I talked a little bit about this, I think, in the drawing video. When we're thinking about painting, let's see, I might need a bigger brush. Hold on, I'll do pastel. I'm just going to do a quick paint over as an illustration of this idea, but we're really kind of thinking about planes and masses, right? So we're looking at, I'm going to ignore the eyes. We're thinking about this abstract shape here. It's an exaggeration, of course, because we have the eye structure here. Let me get a little bit smaller. Right? But the idea is to illustrate this concept of these masses of light and dark. So it's really hard to see and learn to see it in the beginning. Our tendency naturally is to want to see all the nitty-gritty details and to draw all of them out early on. But it's almost too much information for the purposes of the painting. So what we want to think about is this abstraction and really just draw the essentials of the anatomy and of the shadow and light shapes. So my suggestion, your proportions and everything seems pretty good in terms of position. Let me look at these eyes a little bit closer. Here we go. Yeah, so I think it's just there's too much going on, too much information going on in here for me to decipher exactly where you intended the corners of the eye to be, because there's 1, 2, 3, 4 lines. Really, all you need as far as lines go you have the crease for the eyelid, the mobile eyelid. You have the lash line. You have the underplane if you can see it. And that's it. And then you have, I wouldn't even worry about the cast shadow on the eyeball because that can be done tonally later on. I realize that that's what you're indicating, but it can throw off your drawing. And plus you have this in the whites of the eyes, and it's going to kind of fight you when you start getting into the painting stage. You can easily indicate that cast shadow when you're in the tonal underpainting stage. So just keep that in mind. So the lines here are the ones in white that I just suggest you make sure you have. You know, make sure you have that underplane and keep it very, very simple. Just the lid. Don't worry about any of the eyelashes. Those aren't painted until the very end of the painting. Your cast shadows are fine, for the lashes, but really, really just try to simplify it a little bit more. I think the position of your nose, everything here seems good. Even in the mouth, I didn't see anything that was too far off. It's just that you want to simplify your drawing for the purpose of the transfer. This would be a lot of work to transfer to, and you're just kind of creating more work for yourself. And if you watch the beginning of the video, I talked about how sometimes these little outlines in here, if you transferred that as a line, that's going to end up striking through, because we're transferring in a dark color. So it's gonna, and then you're gonna be scumbling your light mass over that. And that light mass is going to dry a little bit more transparent. And then those outlines are gonna strike through, and it's gonna fight you through the whole painting. And it could show up even years down the line. I've had it happen to me because your painting dries a little bit more transparent over years and years. And so it will kind of strike through in your painting later. That's also one of the reasons why we do our transfer in oil, because it has a less likelihood of striking through the painting than something like graphite, which almost always does. And if any of you have ever seen like some Gérôme paintings, I noticed in his a lot of graphite striking through the drawing, in certain areas of his painting. So that just goes to show you that it does happen. All right, so you have a beautiful drawing. I think it just needs a little bit of simplification, and you'll be ready for transfer. And if you have any follow-up questions, you can post your edited drawing on the forum, and I will give you any further feedback that you feel you need before you move on into the transfer video. All right. All right, so that was it, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. I know I've repeated myself a few times, but I just want to make sure because some people have tuned in at different times. The videos that are currently up for the new lesson, they don't have, for some reason the video file didn't export with the thumbnail of the reference, which it usually does like a split screen. So we're trying to figure out why it did that, but we will have the newer ones uploaded tonight. But you can still go through and watch it if you want to go ahead and get started on your lesson. But there will be ones updated where you can see the photo reference as I'm working and see what I'm referring to. Anyhow, so any last questions? Does anyone have any questions about anything in general from the lessons? Oh, you guys are all welcome. Thank you for tuning in. And if you're in Group B and you didn't tune in Group 1 or Group A this morning, you're welcome to jump in on those too if you find it useful to watch other people's critiques. All right, so no last minute questions. If you guys think of something, just let me know. And I hope you guys enjoy the new week's lessons. Can you go to sleep now? Yes, you can. What time is it there for you, Colin? It's late, huh? Where are you at? Where are you located? Thank you, Brenda. Yeah, it's 4:30 for me here, so it's kind of midday. London town. All right. Yeah, it is pretty late for you. I'm sorry. Yeah, well, I can always see if maybe someone would be willing to switch with you if it would be easier for you to attend the morning one. Just why don't you message me about that if it's really, really late for you? I know it's kind of hard because everyone's in different time zones. The other one is from 11 a.m. to 1:30 or so. All right. Well, thank you guys. Thank you, Joyce. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. And I will see you in our forum, and I'll see you next week. All right. Have a good one, guys.